scored. Plenty of sides are feeling well placed to make their move when the league resumes after the international break. In the bottom half, Bournemouth and Sheffield United are still looking for their first wins of the season, but it was a good weekend for Everton, who were the only side in the bottom six to avoid defeat to move them clear of trouble. However, our focus will be on the top of the table and that big clash at the Emirates. And who better to provide expert analysis than former England manager Glenn Hoddle? And as ever, Glenn and I are joined by Leroy Rossina. Leroy, who are you hoping to hear from today?
Well, look, it's such a competitive Premier League. It's so exciting. So, look, who can win the Premier League? Can Tottenham win it? Can Arsenal win it? Can Liverpool win it? What about the Villa? What about West? Oh, no, that's being silly. Anyway, the rest of them. Can you win the Premier League? Get in touch using the hashtag #PLFans.
Thank you, Leroy. Well, Glenn, it was billed as the biggest game of the season. Two title contenders going head-to-head. Did you think we got the game we were expecting?
No, I don't think anyone expected the game. We're all excited about it because in the past, City have had they've had it over Arsenal, haven't they? For 12 games, they've beaten them. And you think, well, they play their open football. Arsenal, actually, I think over the last few years have attempted to try and take them on toe-to-toe with Arteta coming from City. But I think he's learned a lot from the last few seasons. Looked at it and thought, no, a little bit more pragmatic today. And they played that way and it worked out for them. And they got a little bit of luck at the end with the deflected goal. But it certainly wasn't the game that we all anticipated, no.
I agree. It was a real tactical battle in the end, wasn't it? Well, let's have a look at the formations and how the teams lined up. Jorginho and Trossard were two changes that Mikel Arteta made for his team. Havertz and the injured bukayo Saka missing out, and Gabriel Martinelli made the bench. That was a big moment for Mikel Arteta. And for Manchester City, there were three changes that Pep Guardiola made to his team. Gvardiol, Lewis and Bernardo Silva all came in. Akanji, Nunes and Doku were on the bench after that defeat to Wolves. So both made changes, both made tactical, enforced certainly with the absence of Saka. But I thought Arsenal started the game pretty well. It allowed Declan Rice to play a more advanced position. I think we saw him play in these positions up alongside Odegaard at times, leaving Jorginho deep. And for Manchester City, we've got them lining up in this way. The big surprise, first of all, was Bernardo Silva not playing in a wide position.
Role, yeah.
And the second surprise may be that both of these players kept on coming narrow into these positions.
I was very surprised to see Silva going back in there as the six. And I think that's Pep saying, I want to dominate this game with the ball. Defensively, he's not going to be the best in there. Obviously, Rodri is a massive miss for them. But I think that was him going in with his intent of, we'll take the ball away from you. Didn't quite work out that way. But then the two lads coming in, Foden and now Perez, just going tighter on the pitch, didn't work for them. They tried to push the fullbacks higher up and in width. But for me, City looked a little bit... I was looking at them thinking, they don't look themselves today. And it wasn't just because Rodri wasn't playing. Yes, a big issue, because he's such a good player in that position. But it was the lack of width. Now, they always, go back to when Mahrez was there and when Grealish plays, they hold the line. They've got real, genuine width. They didn't have that. Doku, when he comes on, gave them width. But suddenly I'm looking at it thinking, where's your width gone up the top end of the pitch? Sometimes that's not because you want the ball. Sometimes it's you're stretching your team that you're playing against, and then your little pockets are free for people to go and play in. And I felt that midfield three for City really were... Normally you can't see what shape they're playing in because they've got rotations and whereas you could always put a net over them and catch them all in the same net to a certain degree.
No, I agree. And I think it was evident that Manchester City didn't quite look themselves. They did play particularly narrow for them. And I think it showed with the way the XG went for both teams. If it just highlight right at the start, you can see that Manchester City had a really good couple of chances within the first 5 or 8 minutes of the game. And then not really much else for the rest of the game. I mean, that chance came from a set piece, pretty much. Flick on from Haaland and Ake with the finish. And never really had an opportunity. The bigger the spike, the better chance is what teams have. And City had one big chance, never really had any other. Arsenal struggled to create, had a bit of possession. They had shots, but never really created. And even the goal that they scored didn't bring them a big spike.
Yeah, I think that's on paper. We were looking at that thinking, well, there's going to be goals, lots of goals. There's going to be a lot of creation. There's going to be chances created. Wasn't like that at all. Absolutely. I've never seen City create less than that. They just could not. They weren't themselves. They didn't get in behind at all. Normally you see them working so hard to go down one side, the width on the other side, and they get in with little blindside runs. Yes, they're missing De Bruyne and Rodri. They're great players. Not just good players, they're great players. They're a part of their spine. But, that's where you have to go back into your team maybe and find a structure on a given couple of games where the team's really good. You're not going to have the individuals to win the game. You've got to get the team structure right. And I think on the day, they got it wrong. Very, very rarely you say that about Pep. But there's the stat. They didn't create as much as they normally do.
Well, you're right. We're so used to seeing that spike all the way along. Would you believe that early chance was how Pep imagined the game going? That was as good as it would get for his team?
No, I don't think for 1 minute he thinks this is the only chance. I think he's thinking, well, they've cleared one off the line. We've started on the front foot. This will continue. I don't think he's ever set his teams out. There's a good chance as well. Okay, he just couldn't keep over the top of it. But then if you're on the City bench as a manager or the player, you think we've started really well in this big game. Let's take it on from here, like we have done against Arsenal time and time again. Just didn't happen for him. And I think it was down to the lack of real width in the top end of the pitch.
Which we don't usually see from Pep, but this is something else we don't usually see from Pep. Shots. Few shots from his team. That was the lowest amount of shots his team have ever had in the Premier League. We've seen some low ones, but we associate Manchester City with 15, 18, 20 shots in a game. That was alarming, do you think?
Yeah. Well, it is. But don't forget as well, mentally, Leon, they're coming off the back of a defeat themselves. They lost at Wolves. It's not all hunky-dory there at the moment. They've got some key players they're missing. So they've got some work to do to get back to creating. One thing they do is create, shot after shot. I think, as you say, early in the stages there, they had the chances. Other than that, Reyes had not much to do apart from distribution from the back. He didn't really have that many saves to make, did he?
Well, you mentioned certain players who aren't at Manchester City anymore, who did give them the width. I mean, I'm looking at some of these games. October 2023, September 2023, September 2023. Yes, they beat Fulham 5-1, but they only had 7 shots. So of the top 5 fewest shots Pep's teams have had, 3 of them have been in the first 8 games of the season.
Yeah, I mean, listen, they finished strong last year. They won't panic. That's the one thing. They've come from behind many, many times, and they did it last year incredibly well when they were running out of games. Yes, there's a blip at the moment, but they'll get it back. And certainly when Rodri comes back in, there'll be a different team. Silva will be further up the pitch, and Bernardo Silva will be up the pitch without a doubt. And he'll work his magic again. Ireland's gone through a little bit of a spell, as well. He'll come good. Great strikers. As the sun comes up in the morning, a striker like Ireland's going to be back on the hall scoring goals again.
Well, let's take a look at how Manchester City went about it. Also, how Arsenal were trying to nullify their threat. And as you've already mentioned, Manchester City trying to get the width from their fullbacks. You can see, I'll just show you how the back four is actually lining up.
Yeah.
And then that midfield trio that you said, usually you can't necessarily tell how Manchester City are playing in the middle. You certainly could in this game. And as you also mentioned, you could throw a blanket on them.
You could. That's the key for me. There wasn't enough space. If you get 2 players going into the deep position, you want your other one coming into these little off the front positions in these spaces. You don't want where everyone can see. Arsenal, you look at Arsenal there, they played in that first half almost like 2 separate teams. You got the 5 up there and you got the 5 defending. Sometimes Jorginho or maybe Zinchenko might go in there, hit their team and said, those 5, you're going to deal with them up there. We're going to press them. We're going to block them in that middle. And in a way, Man City made it easy for them because they put their bodies in there. They didn't have any imagination. And the width was from their fullbacks. This is where we're talking about. All through the game, these 2 up here, Foden and Alvarez, played inside. And it made it so easy for that 5 to defend against.
Yeah, usually we see teams do that, don't we?
Yeah.
Give real width and keep opposition defences all the way in these positions. Ben White would have to go back there. Zinchenko would go back there. But you think this made it actually easier for Arsenal to defend by Manchester City operating in those positions?
It definitely in the spaces and closing the spaces, but also when you think about it, defensively, every Arsenal player for the majority of the game could see the ball and he could see your opponent. If you're out on the wide berth, you're looking at the ball. Now, sometimes you can't see what your opponent is. He's on your shoulder.
Yeah.
So straight away, that mentally and visually for Arsenal, it was a day made easy. All they had to watch sometimes was that ball over the top. But if you're making City play long balls over the top, it's a good day for you because normally they play through you.
Absolutely. So let's see how they managed to nullify Manchester City. I mean, I think Arsenal are quite dominant in the middle. I think they're trying to make sure City have to use spaces in those wide areas, and people City had in the wide areas were these fullbacks.
Yeah, and they get out here, but they're forced. The press is on. They're forced to go back again. This was the key. They were trying. City are looking and trying to probe. In the end, that's an awful ball back there, and they're just clearing it anywhere. And they're happy to clear it after trying to get out. And Arsenal did it time and time again, but there was a lack of width there. This is the ball we're talking about, that they had to be on guard. They're forced. If you're forcing City to play them balls over the top from that distance, then you're in the game. That's what you want. If they're playing them from here with a De Bruyne playing or Lewis or sliding balls through, you might be in a bit of trouble. But you take that all day against City.
Yeah, they're so much more effective. Yeah, passes are coming through that position, aren't they? But I think what Arsenal have in Saliba is someone that can actually compete against Erling Haaland. There aren't many across the Premier League, but he was happy to give him a physical battle and to race him and to physically go up against him.
He was always ready. He was on the half turn almost, and he reacted quicker than Haaland to that ball over the top. They spoke about that. If we get the press right and if we keep locking them down, the ball, hopefully they'll send it over the top. You got to be on your toes waiting for that ball.
Yeah, I mean, when Manchester City defend deep, I mean, they're so good in possession, but they're also so good when they've got space to run into. And how often we've seen this type of situation maybe happen, and you know, you just see all of this space for Erling Haaland, and he must have been thinking, here we go.
As it developed in the game and I was watching it, that was the moment I thought, wow, he's going to be in here. But Saliba does fantastic. It's great defending. It really is clever defending. Haaland might have made it a bit more difficult by maybe making a run towards to take him away and then go. Yeah. Because then he couldn't block him because physically
he runs that way first
and then goes in. Because it was obvious that Lewis was going to play the ball. He was slowly getting pressured, but he still had a little bit of time to make that run from there and go. But if we run it on, it's really top defending that just blocks him off and says, have some of that. And we've seen Haaland do that to defenders the other way around, where he blocks them off.
Yeah, we have. But City, I mean, they're such a good team. They did find moments. They did play through the Arsenal press. And
if that's the classic, this area here, when you press a team, to get through the press, and we'll see it later on with, I think, Brighton and Liverpool, you're seeking to get on the back of the midfield, and they did it. Only on a few occasions, City, but this was the time, and it was because Zinchenko earlier wasn't getting there.